As well as the passenger trams, there was a large fleet of miscellaneous vehicles, the most interesting of which were the breakdown trams. Most of these were converted from four-wheel C-class passenger trams built about the turn of the century. They were not always as dilapidated as these examples. This breakdown tram was converted from a trailer from the steam era. In 1955, four O-class passenger trams had their centre compartments enclosed to provide a more modern breakdown vehicle. We have already glimpsed examples of these scrubber cars converted from D-class trams, also dating from the turn of the century. These trams had carborundum blocks between the wheels to clean and grind the track. These ancient trams continued in use until the very last days of tramway operation in Sydney in 1961. This veteran seems to be acting out an ancient ritual as it grinds its way along the long siding at Moore Park. Earlier in this film, we've seen examples of some of the other non-passenger vehicles, ballast motors and sprinkler cars. As late as 1956, a weed-burning tram was built on the bogie of a withdrawn passenger car. A mixture of oxygen and acetylene was used to burn weeds from the track. The weed burner was propelled or towed by a scrubber car. Finally, this is an example of another form of grinder with a large rotating carborundum wheel to grind and clean the rails. Now we visit Randwick Workshops, maintenance centre for the Sydney Tramways. Located at the corner of Darley Road and King Street, Randwick, the open section of the former workshop site is now occupied by the Randwick College of TAFE and the University of New South Wales. In bygone days, long lines of trams filled the area, waiting to be overhauled or, in the case of older trams, to be scrapped. Access to the repair shop was by traverser. And inside the buildings, a tram being lifted into the air was a common sight. Workshop employees had a special tram service to bring them to and from work. These trams are leaving the workshops, taking employees home in the late afternoon. For the Queen's first visit to Australia in 1954, city streets and buildings were lavishly decorated, and 4 trams were painted in special colour schemes and fitted with a crown on top. One of the largest decorations was this Union Jack on a David Jones store. Another of the decorated trams in a particularly handsome colour scheme of ivory with blue and gold lining. The 1950s saw the gradual rundown of Sydney's tramways, with most closures concentrated over a 4-year period from 1957 till 1961. On the 14th of September 1959, the last mass movement by tram in Sydney took place when more than 14,000 schoolchildren travelled to the showground to take part in a display for Princess Alexandra of Kent. Having collected its load of schoolchildren, this tram is traversing the Queen Square Loop before heading for the showground. College Street. Deprived of their normal terminus, Watson's Bay trams were turned back in Boomerang Street. College Street, Oxford Street, Flinders Street nearing Moore Park. Turning onto the long siding opposite the showground. 109 special trams were scheduled for this mass movement. 16 coupled sets of footboard trams and 7 corridor trams carried children from St James, while 35 coupled sets ran from Central Railway. Princess Alexandra was one of the few people at the showground that day who did not travel by tram. As was the custom with these mass movements, an overhead tower wagon was in attendance in case of any problems with overhead wiring. While the display was in progress, trams were shunted to await the return journey. After the display, the operation was repeated in reverse, with the schoolchildren being returned to St James and Central stations. For the last time, Sydney's trams were showing their ability to move large numbers of people quickly and efficiently. This coupled set is headed for Central Railway. A flagman was provided to help with the crossing of Anzac Parade, after which the trams followed Cleveland Street towards Central. Many trams on such services from the showground followed unusual routings. This tram is turning from Cleveland Street into Crown Street. On the 1st of February 1960, the special tracks at Randwick Racecourse were used for the last time. The services had been greatly reduced from the hectic days of the 1920s, but toast rack trams still predominated, despite the availability of more modern corridor trams. Trams leave the racecourse, bound for Circular Quay and the railway after the last race. Part of this facility was converted for use by buses, but their role in carrying racegoers is insignificant compared with that of the trams. After the last tram has gone, the breakdown car, stationed at the racecourse in case of emergency, makes its departure. Now we see the results of a minor mishap to a bus in Phillip Street. On the afternoon of the 14th of January 1960, just a few weeks before the end of tram services in Phillip Street, this bus dropped its left side wheels into a hole. Outbound trams could not go past, and a bank-up quickly occurred. Before long, trams were blocked all the way around the Circular Quay terminal loop and back up to the site of the blockage in Phillip Street. Pending the removal of the bus, the solution was to run the trams back to Hunter Street crossover on the wrong line. These trams are turning against the flow of traffic from Phillip Street into Hunter Street. And into Elizabeth Street. At Hunter Street, trams use the crossover to reach the outbound track. Inbound trams continue to bank up, leading to further congestion. Further along Elizabeth Street, a policeman on point duty has little tolerance for motorists who do not understand his instructions. At Market Street, the traffic jam is taking a long while to clear. By 1960, only a handful of routes were still operated, and Elizabeth Street was the last city street with trams. In February of that year, the line to Circular Quay was cut back to Hunter Street, which formed the terminus for the last year of tramway operation. This quiet location was a far cry from the busy terminal scenes at Circular Quay. A tram leaves the Hunter Street terminus on an outbound trip. During the 1950s, enthusiasts worked hard to keep the tram system and also made many tours on chartered trams. This is a roundup of some of those tours. In 1951, it was possible to travel on a brand new tram, the first of the 100 trams built after the war. An outing with one of the Neutral Bay Line trams. Coupled PR1 class trams, of which 4 were experimentally converted from the P-class footboard design. The tour trams visit the Watsons Bay Line. And cross Cooks River Bridge bound for Walleye Creek. Many tours were associated with line closures. And there were also trips on the specially decorated Royal Tour trams. E-class trams made an outing after their return to the main system from the neutral Bay line immediately before withdrawal. This C-class breakdown tram was partially restored to passenger configuration and was a popular feature on tours, a bouncy ride. On many of the last day tours, it was important to cover every inch of track with close supervision from the passengers. A pair of P-class trams makes good time on the La Perouse line. And visits Maroubra. An R-class tram crosses King Street as it leaves Randwick workshops on the last day of the Coogee line. The carriage of mail by tram was commemorated on the last day of tours, a week before the last lines closed in February 1961. The rusty track at the showground caused sparks from the wheels. A visit to the dive siding opposite Randwick Racecourse. A pair of tour trams at Hunter Street Terminus. At Moore Park, one of the trams was derailed while shunting onto a siding. This was the last derailment of a tram in Sydney, and the breakdown tram was summoned from Dowling Street. The derailed tram having been restored to the tracks, the breakdown tram leaves the scene. Meanwhile, the tours were continuing, with another tram substituted for the derailed car. More than 10 years of enthusiasts' tours came to an end as the trams left Randwick workshops and the dive siding. Gradually, the sight of disused tracks became more common. In the last year of operations, the footboard trams had gone, leaving only corridor cars. Finally, only the routes to Maroubra and La Perouse, with their wide open spaces, had trams. The last day of tramway operation was the 25th of February 1961. Many trams were adorned with chalk signs. Unwanted trams were transferred to Randwick workshops for disposal. Some of these transfers offered the rare sight of corridor trams running coupled, which never occurred in passenger operation. The last trams left Hunter Street Terminus for La Perouse just before 3 p.m. So great were the crowds that 3 trams were needed to operate the last trip. The convoy consisted of car 1961, followed by 2035, with 1995 as the last tram of all. The convoy passes Moore Park. Maroubra Junction. A large crowd was waiting at La Perouse to see the trams make their final appearance. The new order made its presence felt. The convoy of trams headed back from La Perouse to Kensington Junction. All passengers alighted and the trams ran empty to Randwick workshops. When the trams ran through the gate at the workshops just before 4:30 p.m, tramway operation in Sydney came to a close. Disposal of the trams took many months, during which they stood forlornly in the Randwick workshop's yard. Most trams were scrapped by burning. This sequence was filmed over several years. All of the trams, toast rack and corridor alike, received the same treatment. The corridor trams, although having steel side panels, were largely of timber construction, and they were destroyed by burning just as effectively as the toast rack cars. The destruction of these corridor trams, some of them less than 8 years old, was an unprecedented act of official vandalism. Some trams, especially the corridor types, were sold for use as outbuildings on farms. This tram is leaving the workshops for such a purpose. And This tram is in quiet retirement at Bilpin. Not all the trams were scrapped or sold as sheds. These two scrubber cars, more modern than the others, were sold to Melbourne in 1959. They were originally K-class passenger trams, the same type as seen earlier on the Neutral Bay line. The two veterans worked in Melbourne for more than 40 years until 2002. Having been originally built in 1908, the same year as the first Model T Fords, they were the oldest vehicles of any description in routine use in Australia.